everyone. Thank you for joining us for another session today. Today we're going to focus on certification and labels. And to chair the session, I'd like to introduce Mr. Daniele Ponzi, who is the Technical Advisor for the Environment and Chair of the Environment Thematic Group Committee here at ADB.
Thank you, Erin. So I'll introduce the rest of the panel. So we'll start with Ms. Sherin Lin. She is the Vice President of the Academy and Life Care Greater China, TÜV Rheinland Guangdong, China. Then we have Ms. June Thompson, Communication Management from the Forest Stewardship Council. Then we have, anywhere where you want to sit. Mr. Geoffrey Maldon, Senior Manager in Business Industry of WWF. Yes, have a seat. Mr. Fazluk Haq, Managing Director of Plumbing Fashion Limited. And then Dr. Madhu Khanna, Professor, University of Illinois, Urbana-Champaign. All right, so we'll start with the session. I see we have a good audience. As we mentioned yesterday, actually, during the opening, if you remember, there was quite an interesting slide that I presented where we had the different entry points of the business cycle, where we have the inputs, the process, the product, and the markets, the outputs and the markets, where we had different entry points. And as you know, unless we have ways for the consumers and the business-to-business clients to actually see what's the difference between a normal product in the market and a product which is sustainably produced and distributed and sustainability is integrated along the supply chain, it's difficult for consumers or for business-to-business customers to actually make a choice, an informed choice. So it's definitely important to have a good system of labeling and certification. And this is also very important in terms of greening businesses. So those businesses which are not yet in the so-called environmental goods and services market, the smaller circle we were mentioning yesterday, but rather the other millions of companies in the various sectors, both products and services, which are actually going green, in the process of greening themselves. In many ways, as we were saying, the demand is very, very important. And when we are talking about the demand, we are not talking about consumers' demands, which is about 6-7 billions now, but also the demand through the supply chain in terms of the companies and the corporations themselves, what we were just mentioning as business to business, is very, very important. And this also allows the companies, the producer, but also the distributors, the retailers to actually differentiate their products so that they are recognizable, and then in most cases they can increase their shares, they can sell at a premium, they can have penetration of new markets, and they can really differentiate their products accordingly. One of the key questions relating to labeling certification, and actually one of the benefits in coming forward with this kind of certification systems, is for consumers and for business-to-business clients actually verify the credibility of the claims that are being made by those producers and distributors. And making sure that behind the products, behind those services and those claims, there are actually sustainable supply chains, so that the actual process of production, manufacturing, distribution, and sale is actually sustainable from A to Z. And it's also important at the same time, and maybe during this discussion we'll have a few minutes, also looking at other voluntary approaches. You know, we have a series of ISO, codes of conduct, and other type of best practices guidance, very often at the industry level, most of the time voluntaries, you know, sometimes also driven by government actions, but definitely a number of standardization processes have also been helpful in the certification type of efforts. One area also would be nice to touch during the discussion, and encourage speakers to do that, is to have a look at also the consultancy business. I mean, all those companies, firms, very often small consulting firms who actually provide services for the certification and labeling kind of business. That's very important, it's green business itself. Then I would like to mention maybe another couple of things. Is a bit of history very, very quickly in 1 minute. It's by some of the articles I've seen in the literature with my colleagues in the last few months. We have about a 45 years history of labeling and certification, basically started in the 70s. And as I mentioned, apart from all the eco-labels, ISO 14000 in particular, 14001 and that series, which was the equivalent of the 9000 series for quality management, there has been a lot more that also range different sectors, and also in service sectors as well, or even in construction. If you think about LEED and green buildings type of certification, or if you think about Green Globe when it comes to tourism and hospitality type of services. So very much multi-sectoral and expanding in all kind of directions. By some estimates, we have something like the estimate produced by International Eco Labeling Index. They estimated about 465 different international eco labels in more than 200 different countries and more than 25 sectors according to the International Eco Labeling Index. So basically, we have a wide range, and the quality, of course, of certification process in place is very varied. So another question for discussion, how much we can rely on such a wide universe of certification processes in place. One thing I would like to mention before closing my introduction is one of the ways that has been pretty interesting to see in the last 7, 8 years, and we have WWF here represented, is their attempt, instead of going, you know, if you look at the champagne glass, where you have quite a large bottom of billions of producers, like 1 billion, 1.5 billion, and then you have the very thin stem, and then you have a very large actual glass where you drink your spumante or champagne or prosecco. You know, I'm Italian, I have to do a bit of domestic advertisement there. Is the very large top of the glass is the actual consumers, 7 billion. Difficult to work with 7 billion people, of course. Consumers influence consumer choice is also another area, but then difficult. And what WWF did is selected the most important 500 companies in the middle, who are actually the distributor, the retailers, the traders, and others who are actually much more reachable because they are only 500 for all kinds of commodities, soft commodity products, and different type of, in particular for soft commodities and food and raw materials for the food industry. It's really something that is much more doable to reach those rather than working on 1.5 billion producers or the 7 billion of consumers. So really getting the best out of the buck in terms of efforts. So I will just stop here, and we have a number of things, and definitely it will be interesting to hear the discussion now. So I will start with Sherin, who will give us an introduction, a little bit of background and state of the art and an update of the labeling and certification industry. Sherin, you have the floor. Possibly, I'm not sure if you have a PowerPoint, right?
So good afternoon, and happy to be here to share with you our opinion, our point of view from a third-party certification body. TÜV Rheinland is an international certification body active in 150 countries and with the headquarters in Germany. And I come from China. So when we talk about the sustainability certification and eco-label, and this responds to several of the 17 goals set in the Global Sustainable Development Agenda 2030, especially with the high relevance to Goal 12, ensuring sustainable consumption and production patterns. Labeling is an important element of sustainable consumption and production. For an organization or company, we can label its management system with a sustainability certification, which you're familiar with, like ISO 14000, ISO 50001, etc. Yeah, and for products, yeah, we can label it with a visible mark with the purpose to influence the buying behavior of consumers. So I'm not talking loud enough. Okay. So is it better? Yeah. Okay, thank you. So what is eco-label? And as mentioned, it's already started in the past 40, 50 years. Even earlier, in the early of 19th, already started in the US in the area of food product safety. And later on, the regulatory oversight expanded from food safety to health, to working condition, social metrics, and environmental impact. And nowadays, when we talk about eco-label, actually it dominates mainly on the environmental metrics instead of social metrics. And also it is a voluntary approach, and it means that with the label, it meets very specific environmental criteria. By now, in the eco-label index, we have at least 431 eco-labels in 246 countries and in 25 industries. So a lot of information. If we look into it, it can be categorized by different dimensions. By ownership, for example, operated by first party, for example, ProPlanet by the river, and operated by third party, like TÜV Rheinland is a third party. We have also our own green mark label, and of course other certification bodies like UL, Intertek, etc. come up also with their own labels. By regulators, like the EU Eco-Label, which is quite familiar maybe to you, and Blue Angel in Germany, Energy Star US, and operating by industry associations like Forest Stewardship Council, etc. So another dimension can be also in the application sector. So very diversified in 25 industries like forestry, energy, fair trade, carbon footprint, organic, etc. And of course by regions. If I look at this, the drivers or eco-labeling bodies behind, and about 49% is a non-for-profit organization, but still 16% are full profit, and about 4% is driven by government. 95% of eco-labeling requires certification. Yeah, only 5% require only registration. So this is an overview about eco-label, and then it's already enough information to confuse our consumers, and also enough information to torture the manufacturers. So currently what we see is the consumers are exposed with different labels and with the purpose to enable informed decision, but now I think they are all left with tons of information and get confused. And for manufacturers, and they're required to get the different labels, maybe from their buyers, and also quite often these labeling schemes are quite duplicative, and also they have to do a lot of redundant of administration work to apply for these labels. So if there was a research among the managers and also sustainability practitioners about their perception of challenges, and ranking high is the confusion to the consumers and fragmentation of eco-labels and lack of consensus on criteria. And what is the pressure or the driving force behind to enable this eco-labeling? And ranking high is the regulation, and also internally from the management and also employees and the investors. Quite surprisingly, is actually the civil society or NGO actually does not rank top 3 among these pressures. Okay, we have an overview about eco-label certification, and we heard about the challenges and where is the opportunity. I'd like to give you a little bit more information about the business size. Yeah. This is the ISO 14001. This is one of the label certification more on sustainability, but this is also because the long history of development and getting mature and also consolidated and reliable data. And so far, there are already 320,000 certificates issued in 2015. So this is a growth rate in the last year of 8% globally. And this is another certification which is related to energy management system. Yeah, this is pretty new in the ISO family, but has rapid growth. Yeah, and until last year, already 12,000 certificates were issued. Yeah. And looking at these certificates, what kind of market size does it tell us? And this is a calculation by us regarding the certification cost, or you can say the market size for the certification industry. So for ISO 14000, yeah, I think until this year, 2016, we are going to reach $1 billion globally, only for certification cost. But don't forget that we also have consulting and training, etc., opportunities for a lot of SME consulting companies, etc. So this can easily come up to $3 billion market for this one single certificate, ISO 14001. Have a look at this ISO 50001 Energy Management System certificate. It's until 2015, the certification market can reach $42 million, and it has a compound growth rate of 128%. So it's growing rapidly. So we talk about also these over 400 eco-labels. What kind of market size is that when that comes into account? If how many certificates are issuing? For example, give you an example. This is the very young certificate that is developed by TÜV Rheinland in green products. In the last 4 years, only in the electrical products, we issued 127 certificates. And if we talk about this size, global size of 400 eco-label, easily that is about a $4 billion market for only certification of the eco-label. So just give you insight about our perspective regarding this market size. Thank you.
Now go to June, who will. Yes, we'll now move to the second presentation. I understand you don't have a PowerPoint, right? Or you have? Okay, good.
There is the tree.
All right. Not yet, not yet. All right, so June will give us a little bit, a brief introduction of the work of the Forest Stewardship Council. She's based in Hong Kong and is the communication manager, as I mentioned earlier. So you have, I think, 8 minutes, right? Yes, and you can start. You have the floor.
I'll try to stick to that. Now go through the slide really quickly. That's easier. Hi, thanks for having me here and FSC on this panel. I can see it will be a very interesting discussion because it's really well covered. So with no further delay, on behalf of Forest Stewardship Council, I would like to talk about how we can promote better forests through the power of certifications and labels. I think like from these 2 days discussions, we can all agree like natural capital is very important and forest is one of the natural capital. And therefore, we believe that through the certifications and labeling system, we can make sure we will have forests for all forever. So give you a bit background about what we do. So we found in 1993 after the Earth Summit in 1992, and our mission is to promote responsible management of the world's forests. We are an independent global nonprofit organization, and we are a membership organization. So I don't know if we categorize ourselves as like industry organization, actually. And we offer 2 types of certifications. One is forest management, and the other is chain of custodies, which I will go briefly to that. So like in 20 years, what have we achieved? We are really grateful that a lot of corporate partners are willing to come on board. We work with like some of the world's like biggest brands to achieve their sustainability goals, like Tetra Pak, like IKEA, like Lego. And we also receive overwhelming support by a lot of environmental and social organizations. And I would like to take this opportunity to say that we are not just taking care about environmental perspective. Actually, from our standards, we also taking care of the social perspective, such as gender and indigenous people's rights, etc. And therefore, like, we also receive like support from other like civil society organizations as well. So like in this 20 years, so where were we? Where are we now? We successfully got 17% of the world's industrial roundwood FSC certified. And globally, we have more than 195 million hectares of forest certified in 83 countries. And for chain of custody certificates, we have more than 31,000 in 122 countries. So go back to Asia. In Asia, we have about 11 million hectares of certified area in 18 countries, which account for about 6% of global certified area. And the chain of custody certificates actually are growing really fast worldwide, and in Asia Pacific as well. So in Asia Pacific, we have about 9,500 chain of custody certificates in 37 countries, which is about 30% of the global COC certificates. So yeah, so like why do we have to have 2 types of certifications? So the purpose is to maintain an unbroken supply chain, so we can ensure like the claim can pass from one manufacturer from forest to retailer. And that is like the reason behind. And the label is served as kind of like a reward system for the businesses who support the responsible forest management practice. So like just brief background of how does it work. So FSC set the standards, but we don't do the certification ourselves. It will be like 2 of like the certification bodies with accreditation who do the checking. They will have the independent auditors to do the field check, and then at the end, if everything's okay, the certification bodies will issue the certificates, and they will do like regular yearly check. So like what have been achieved? Like we talk about lots of standards, lots of criteria. So because with the certification, there's a demand, and the demand allows us to set high standard on responsible forest management. So in fact, we have 10 principles and 56 criteria, and we have also locally developed indicators which are applicable to all types of forests in the world, including natural forests and plantations. So therefore, we can use a really holistic perspective to well consider all social, environmental, and economic perspective. And then with the label, we can enable businesses and consumers to make informed choices, which is very important, about the forest product they buy, and therefore we can create positive change together. So what would be the benefit? Because we talk about a lot of like, oh, too crowded message, too many labels, but actually people do care. According to the 2015 Nelson Global Corporate Sustainability Report, actually 66% of respondents say they're willing to pay more for products and services that comes from companies who are committed to positive social and environmental impact. And actually, the number is even high in millennials, which is like 73%. And then on the B2B side, excuse me, 80% of certificate holders says FSC label actually add values to their products, and 90% say it actually really helps with them building their positive corporate image as well. And also like offer some tangible business benefit as well, because a lot of time small and community producer can fit in like, corporate procurements, for example, IKEA, because they have FSC certifications. And then FSC certification can be also used as a due diligence tool as well. So like this is just some quick run through to talk about like how we help global brand to achieve their sustainability goal. So if you go to a toy shop, see Lego, and then basically all their packaging now is 100% FSC certified. And Tetra Pak, to do like packaging, also committed to use 100% FSC certified paperboard. And we're talking about 200 billion of label packages. And IKEA, eventually, they have long-term commitment to source all their wood from responsibly managed forests. And FSC standard is the only standard that they recognize these days. And we also got non-timber forest products. For example, this shoe is by H&M, which is the sole is sourced from FSC certified natural rubber. And a lot of fashion beauty brands also come on board now as well. Right. Matthias is giving me the serious look. So just some brands on Asia Pacific. So Peninsula, which is a luxury brand, is since 2013, they already committed to try to use more FSC products. So all their non-finished services, in fact, are now like FSC certified products. And this is like important. This is our FORCES project, which is Forest Certification for Ecosystem Services. And we are the pilot and leader in this kind of area, and we're really looking forward to have some products coming out, which is tradable very soon. And this is just some example to show you FSC product is well recognized in a lot of world events as well. And we also work with smallholders. I'm afraid I might not have time to go through the example, because I really want to show you a video, because a video explains a lot of stuff instead of me doing the talking. So thank you very much for having me here. I want to show you the recent video produced by FSC US, which I hope you will be inspired to join our journey of how you as a consumer or business leader can protect the forest. Thank you.
There is the tree, the forest where the tree grows, and the woman who cares for her land. There is the man who listens to the birds to make sure the forest is healthy. There's the scientist who tests the water, the crew who cuts the tree, and the man who makes it lumber the way his father taught him how. There are the carpenters, the designers, the companies they work for, responsibly choosing their materials. And then there are the people like you. They play a part to keep this cycle going, to keep the forest healthy. And there is a tree that tells this story.
One simple action can have a profound impact. Look for products with the FSC logo and help protect the health of our forests. For all, forever.
Yes, thanks, June. So we can now move to Geoffrey Maldon. As I mentioned earlier, WWF has been a champion, taking all the certification and labeling and the roundtable and the various stewardship councils work forward in many ways. So we are happy to have you here. He's the Senior Manager Business Industry at WWF. Have the floor. Usual 8 minutes, I suppose.
Thank you. So I'm going to have to zip through these quickly to, is that better? Yeah. To stick to the time limit that Matthias has imposed. So I start by just giving a bit of a brief, because I'm coming from a fisheries and aquaculture background, to give us a bit of a set the scene a little bit. So fisheries, aquaculture, very important to hundreds of millions of people in the, yeah, maybe I'll just lift that up. Okay, yeah, that's better, thanks. To hundreds of millions of people in the Coral Triangle region. But what we know about fisheries now is that FAO tells us now that 90% of all fisheries are either fully or overexploited. That leaves only about 10% of fisheries that are not fully exploited, down from about 20% in 2007. So how this is playing out is that in terms of wild capture fisheries, production's stabilising. And so for the last 10 years, that's been the case. At the same time, what we're seeing is aquaculture growing. And that's important because the population's growing. And so aquaculture is being seen as very important for meeting the seafood protein needs of the global population as it grows beyond 7 million. In terms of aquaculture and fisheries, sharing the load, in 2012, nearly half of aquaculture, half of all seafood protein consumed by humans came from aquaculture. In 2030, it's projected that more than 60% of fish for human consumption will come from aquaculture. At the same time, production in wild capture fisheries will drop by about 15%. But it's not just about what's happening in terms of the natural capital base, it's also about consumption. And the quantity of consumption. And in the Asia Pacific, more fish is consumed per capita than the rest of the world. Many countries in the Asia Pacific consume more than twice the amount of fish, of kilogram of fish per year than the global average of about 19.2 kilos, soon to be about 20 kilos of fish per annum. And on top of this, if you overlay that with this slide here, you can see that the dark blue, marine capture fisheries consumption, the contribution to consumption has, as have fisheries production, stabilised, whilst consumption of, per capita consumption from aquaculture is increasing in line with what we're seeing in terms of aquaculture production. A lot of it, no doubt, coming from fresh water. I'll skip through this slide, but the key point to make here is that at the same time as population is increasing, per capita consumption of seafood is increasing. And so what that means is not only are we dealing with a population of 7 billion people and how do we feed them, we're also dealing with the fact that as the population grows, they're consuming more, and we need to find a way to feed them while still fitting in within the systems that we have, the natural systems that we have. So with that bit of background, I'll quickly move to third-party certification and what it means for seafood. So what does it mean for seafood? Well, it's a way of identifying whether seafood products meet or exceed a minimum standard or a threshold. And it provides purchasers of that seafood with a degree of certainty about the social and environmental credentials of the product. But it also incentivises producers to improve their performance and their production systems by rewarding them with, through access to markets and potentially price premiums. The third-party aspect of certification is critical, as Daniela said, in terms of verification, truthfulness, credibility, reliability and fairness of the sustainability claim, so the consumers don't need to do all that homework themselves. There's been a rise of certification in the marine seafood area. Wild caught still remains only one main certification standard that WWF identifies with, that's the MSC. In the aquaculture sector, there's a lot more standards, but it's Daniela said 45 years. In terms of seafood standards, certification is much younger, probably around 20 years. Now, this is the point where I'd like to really focus on the Asia-Pacific role, or the role of Asia-Pacific as a seafood bowl and the consumption side of it. Demand for certified seafood, primarily North America and Europe. The source of that seafood, primarily the Asia-Pacific. So what we're seeing is seafood servicing markets that have a desire to buy a better product. And we're seeing a lot of demand-side commitments going in line with that. This is a list of many. Interestingly, a lot of these are, as you would expect, companies in Europe and North America, although increasingly a number of these companies have flag stores in the Asia-Pacific region, Aeon, Walmart, to name a few. So the fish is coming from Asia, going to Europe and North America. But what we see in terms of certified fisheries in the Asia-Pacific region is only 7% of the total certified fisheries globally come from the Asia-Pacific region. There's around about 300 certified fisheries now under the MSC label. In terms of aquaculture, we see a slightly similar picture, with the exception of salmon from the Nordic states and Pangasius from Vietnam. The intervention, or the points, the amount of product that's able to be certified under the ASC logo still remains relatively small. Shrimp, tilapia, in particular, coming from this part of the world. Ethical consumerism is at the heart of this, because in those places where the seafood is going, consumers seem to respond more actively to the certification. Here in the Asia-Pacific region, the idea of certification is quite soft. And a key point in this issue is the fact that production in the Asia-Pacific region is primarily for domestic consumption. Domestic production equals domestic consumption. That's a table there that shows, between 70 and 90+% of all seafood that's produced locally is consumed locally. You've got that factor on top of a soft commitment to certification in seafood makes things quite difficult. So what's our approach? Well, we reward the best and we try and move the rest. It's a performance initiative. We try to improve, to work with farms, and we work with marine fisheries to improve their performance. And one way of looking at this is through a continual improvement model, a ladder of progression as we call it. So we have fisheries at the bottom, which dealt with illegality issues, destructive fishing issues. We address that in a different way. But fisheries in the middle there, we look for incentives and ways to move those fisheries forward in a time-bound way to improve their performance over time, in return for which they receive incentives and rewards. And we do advocacy and outreach in the consumer markets to make sure that happens, and we can continue to help them improve. Not all fisheries will improve to the level of certification, particularly in this part of the world, and so some will stabilise at a certain level, but the idea is that their performance will improve beyond where they were when we started working with them. I'll slip through those slides because they were only demonstrating the work we would do. One in particular is a tuna fishery in Mindoro and Laganoi here, which is exactly an improvement project designed to aim for MSC certification. So quickly, just some of the issues and challenges that I see in this space. How do we increase investment in technological innovation and transfer to cope with the fact that we're going to need to produce more seafood, primarily in the aquaculture sector? How do we shift incentives to reward improvements in terms of productivity and environmental performance? And how can, through standards, through subsidies, through certification, how do we leverage that technology more broadly to drive some of the gains in productivities and environmental performance and how do we devise policies that can help shift consumption habits, potentially, for example, towards low trophic level species? And I brought a report along and some copies down the back there, and you're welcome to take a copy with you, which talks exactly on that topic. So there's my plug for WWF. And lastly, just in terms of issues and challenges in this part of the world, which I think is an important point, and I hope we get to talk a little bit more about it, is there's low receptiveness to certified seafood in local markets. And so in the absence of certified products, what types of mechanisms are needed to promote responsible? In the absence of credible eco labels, how do we promote responsible production? And how do we reward better and best practice, recognition-wise? Potential issues in the longer term are by having not credible labels are that you start lowering the minimum standards and you end up in a race to the bottom. There's a problem with regional branding in terms of recognition and how can you trust that regional brand. And you can see standards diluted through political or industry influence. Verification is a critical factor, and that leads to cost. It was talked about earlier by one of the speakers, and I think, again, a really important issue for this part of the world is cost, because cost is often a barrier to looking more fully into the certification. And lastly, how do we access capital to help raise this production performance that we need in the coming 20 or 30 years? Thank you.
And so I'll move quickly to Fazlur Haq, the Managing Director of Plummy Fashion Limited, who's been working in basically improving performance, environmental performance of his factory, LEED certified recently. He'll tell us all the story. And he's from the private sector.
Good afternoon. This is the different perspective. We had three presentations, those actually offering the certificate. I'm totally in the different, rather on the opposite side, the recipient of the certificate. So this is the summary of the Plummy Fashions. As Daniel Ponji was telling us, we are the LEED Platinum certified. LEED means Leadership on Engineering and Environment Design. And this certificate comes from USGBC. USGBC, United States Green Building Council. They offer this certificate, and they have the 4 tiers of certification. LEED certificate, if we score 40 points out of 110 points, and then the next tier is the LEED silver certificate. You have to score 50 points out of 110. And then next tier is the gold, LEED gold certificate. You have to score 60 out of 110. And the final tier is the platinum. That is not 70. That you have to score 80 points out of 110 to get the highest possible certification. That is the LEED platinum. And not only the high 80 points, you have to also qualify for 7 other prerequisites. You have to qualify to get the platinum certificate. And we are very proud that we not only earned the LEED platinum certificate, but also we scored world record-breaking score of 92. As of today, nobody in the world could achieve 92. So, and only 10 factories across the world have the LEED Platinum certificate to make you understand how difficult it is. It's not easy. And I have a lot of story, but time is very short. I can only tell you the summary that we are a 40% energy efficient, we are a 41% water efficient, and we produce 35% less carbon in compared to any standard factory in the same field. We have to harvest every single drop of rainwater, and we have to have a natural water body inside the factory, and all of our rooftop are connected with the connected by pipes with the underground reservoir. So we keep all the rainwater and reuse in the toilet flush. And also, to minimize the water use, I can just share a very funny story that in the washroom tap where we go to wash our face and hands, we don't have any idea how much water we are wasting each and every day, at least 3 times a day. An efficient tap produces 7 liters of water. You can check when you go back at hotel or home, 7 liters of water, but certainly you don't need more than a liter of water. If you're a male, you don't need more than a liter of water to wash your face. If you're female, maybe you more, if you have makeup to put it up. Anyway, but still you don't need 7 liters of water per minute. United States Energy Act, Policy Act telling that you are not allowed to use more than 1.5 liter of water per minute. And we had to make sure we have 140 toilets across our factory, and we had to put that control water taps which produce maximum 1.5 liter of water so that we can save huge amount of water every day. On-site renewable energy, we heard throughout the day yesterday and this morning about the power generation through solar. And this is the solar project inside in our factory. And you will be happy to know this is so far the biggest solar project in Bangladesh. We have many, you heard yesterday, but unfortunately not that much big. But in the factory, we have the biggest solar panel. We are producing huge amount of natural power inside the factory. And ETP plant, you know that we have the dyeing process, and ETP is the wastewater polluting the environment and the water. But our ETP, we are making it, the water waste is harmless waste. We are making it harmless. And the next, in the right-hand side, you see the machine we call the RO machine. It's making the wastewater is drinkable. It is purely drinkable water. We are making the waste into drinking water. We are not using it for drinking in true sense, but we are reusing the water in the dyeing process so that we can save 500,000 liters of water per day. So just to make you understand, 500,000 liters of water per day being saved in our factory. Maximum daylight using. If some of you saw the garments factory, you will find that 1,000 tube lights are illuminating in the garments factory, no matter it is day or night. We have 44 skylight. It's a very special light. It brings only sunlight, not the heat. And keeping the factory illuminated by the natural light, so we don't need any single artificial light to run the factory during daylight. And still, it keeps very cool because it does not bring the hot inside. And reduced heat island effect, it is the top of our factory building, and this is covered by the very special kind of steel. You can see in the third line, the SRI value is 79. It means more the SRI value, it absorbs less amount of feet of sun. And the LEED has the requirement that you have to have the minimum 71, and that is very special kind of a steel. Only 4 companies across the world produce this kind of steel. And we had to put it to keep our factory inside very cool and naturally cool. And also, we have the GOAT certificate. One of the certificate was being talked by TUV earlier. There's lots of, but we are in textile. This is one of the most popular, not on the only, but this is one of the most popular certification being used. It is commonly known as GOTS, Global Organic Textile Standard. By this, we are certified to produce the organic product. So we are the greenest factory in the world, and we are also producing the organic product. And as they are telling probable benefit as an user, I can tell in advance. I don't know whether I will be asked the question later on, but I can share my experience. As of today, we are receiving huge amount of positive response from the leading brand across the world. So it's giving us immense amount of benefit, but the question again, it also costs a lot of money to make such a building. So that's all. Thank you.
Thank you, Fazlul. It was very interesting to hear also benefits and the cost, of course, and a very interesting presentation. So I'll pass the floor to Madhu Khanna, professor at University of Illinois.
Well, it's a pleasure to be here. Just as a bit of background, unlike, we have a pretty diverse panel, and I'm neither a certifier nor somebody who's certified, but as an environmental economist, I spend a lot of time studying, using large data and actual observations from the real world, from companies that are certified or not certified, and trying to understand broad patterns of why do companies seek certification, what are the benefits of doing that, and what are the costs, and so on. And so I've been, for the last 2 decades or so, I've been really fascinated by this growth that we've seen in this voluntary approach area where we are, where a lot of companies are going beyond what is required by law and becoming more, claiming to become more sustainable. And so trying to sort of step back a little bit and see, well, we've seen this large increase in the number of companies that are seeking certification, the number of products, as well as the number of eco-labels, as we have just heard, and what is driving that. And a big reason for that is, of course, we've got more globalization, so there is greater trade among countries, products are moving across the world, and there's a lot of differences in regulation across these different countries. And so companies are now able to operate, multinationals are operating across the world in many, many different countries, with their operations being worldwide, and are trading products, and they need to be able to communicate to their consumers about the quality of the products that they are producing. And because regulations are so different, and there's in many of the developing emerging economies, we know that even though there are regulations, they're often not enforced or implemented, and so there's a big difference in terms of what the standards are across these countries. And so these certification agencies, organizations like ISO have actually emerged as a way to offer a standardized way for communicating what the management practices and the production processes are like for these companies, and offering this independent, verifiable method to be able to certify and claim that in fact these companies are following very sustainable practices. And so that is in fact a great thing. ISO in particular is based on this principle of total quality management, which kind of espouses this philosophy that we need to be making continuous improvement in trying to reduce pollution, reduce the defects of production, reduce waste, increase efficiency, and so on. What's been particularly encouraging is that actually the largest growth in ISO certification has happened in the Asian countries. They're leading in terms of the number of certificates, not the Western world, but the developing world. And so the question is, what is driving that? And that's some of the things that we study, and what we find is that it's actually driven largely by the demand by these multinationals. In part, their supply chains are based in developing countries, and they want to make sure that their suppliers are responsible so that there is no backlash on these companies when there are NGOs who are scrutinizing the production process, and they can in fact claim that they are doing the due diligence needed to make sure that they're selecting suppliers that are in fact environmentally responsible. So ISO certification is good in the sense that it's not only the companies themselves and their own production process, but they're also pushing that upstream to their suppliers and are ensuring that the suppliers located in various countries around the world are also following the same types of principles, and they're greening the supply chain, and as a result, even companies that are located, firms, businesses that are located in developing countries, even though their local regulations may not be very strong, but because they are looking for markets in the OECD countries, they are in fact trying to become more sustainable than they would have been otherwise. So there's been a lot of research on ISO 14000 companies, and looking at really, one of the things about these certificates and eco-labels is that they're really management practices. They are process-driven, and so they're specifying how production should take place. But they're not outcome-driven. So they're not themselves saying that you must reduce your pollution by a certain amount. They're really saying, well, you should adopt these types of practices. So there's always that question about, well, you can adopt certain practices, but do they really have the desired outcomes? And so that's where a lot of research goes into trying to figure out how to compare, say, the ISO certified with the non-ISO certified, and you really see a big difference in their actual performance in terms of their environmental outcomes. And one of the promising things actually that has emerged from, of course, there's a lot of mixed evidence, but in general, if we look across a lot of studies, in the case of ISO 14001, it's pretty remarkable that it does seem to have had quite an impact in getting to an improvement in the environmental outcomes that companies have been demonstrating. And these are looking at actually the air pollution, the toxic releases being generated by them, the water pollution being generated by them. And so, so in fact, it does seem to be pretty effective. There is sort of a few notes of caution there, and in particular, that although ISO 14001 and many of these other eco-labels, as we heard today, are independently audited and verified and so on, there's often the auditors that are in fact undertaking this audit. These audits are in fact paid by the companies that they're auditing themselves. And so there is that issue of conflict of interest, and that has been noted in places like China, in places like India, where, in fact, because the auditors themselves are being employed by the companies, there is some concern about their independence. And so I think those are some of the things that need to be watched out for to make sure that these standards and these certificates and eco-labels continue to remain credible and communicate the information that they're trying to do. So talking a little bit more broadly about other eco-labels, and we heard about the FSC and many others that we saw. There's of course a proliferation of eco-labels, and of course that sort of leads to this considerable confusion among consumers about which labels to trust, how do you distinguish among eco-labels, and often there are eco-labels for the same product. And of course, forestry is one of those examples where there's been, both the FSC and then the Sustainable Forestry Initiative have been two competing labels, and one by the Forestry Association, the other led by environmental groups. And of course, the interesting thing there with those two labels has been that they've been competing, but as a result of that competition, both have ratcheted up their standards. And so that has been a good competition, because both these have instead of a race to the bottom, we've had this race to the top. But on the other hand, again, there is this issue of, for example, with labels like FSC, it's a yes or no kind of label. You're either FSC certified or you're not. And so there, as opposed to, say, a label that had various gradations. And so, there's the option to sort of continually improve yourself and go from, good to better and best, as opposed to yes or no. So that's, again, looking at how labels should be designed. And then, again, the issue of how do you measure the outcomes of these labels? I mean, these labeling processes are very costly. How do you measure their impacts? And that's not yet built into these labels. There is no metric about really how do we measure whether biodiversity is in fact improved or not, and so on. So there's still ways to go in terms of trying to improve labels, but they are a way to overcome some of the limitations of weaker government regulations in many of these countries, and as a way to provide consumers with better information. I'll stop with that, and happy to answer questions.
So I will open the discussion here in the panel. Actually, we have about maybe 15 minutes for discussion. I have a question maybe for each of you with a very quick answer, a couple of minutes, and then maybe we can open the floor. I don't know if we have the pigeonhole system. Yes, it's already there, yeah. So, well, I will start with questions I already had in mind, and then maybe we can go for the pigeonhole. I'll start with Fazlul Haq. An important question. Your customers, do they understand the certification you obtain, and what specific benefits the certifications provide to your business? You mentioned something, benefits. Can you give us a little bit of, very quickly, just 1 minute?
As I think the customers, they're quite aware, because in the apparel sector, we had to pass a lot of compliance, and environment is one of the issue is coming up. Only the very big brands, they're talking about the environment. But from that perspective, we can tell that we are addressing the issue today. For the next 5 years, we can feel safe that no major issue can just pull us back, that we are ahead than our competitors. And buyers, that the brands are very happy to see that we are addressing the issues of not only today, we are addressing the issue of tomorrow, what they may think tomorrow. So they are very happy. That is the big advantage we have, that we have the access to almost every brands across the world, which is not an easy job nowadays in such a competitive market. And so that's the advantage we certainly we have right at this moment.
Yeah, thank you, Fazlul. And I have a quick question also for Madhu Khanna, the last presentation. We've been talking about all the drive from the demand from the private sector throughout the supply chain, all of that. But what the government's role is it all about this? I mean, the governments have been supporting, to what extent they have been doing that, eco-labeling and certification, how much they got in terms of support, in terms of financing, in terms of rules around simplification of the process, or other ways. What is your views about government's role in the whole of the certification business?
Well, I mean, from my understanding, I think this has really been this has been very much a non-government activity. I don't think that the government, at least as far as I know, has really intervened in this process. And so it's really the credibility of the, the International Standards Organization, or whichever organization is issuing the label. But in general, I think the question is really, and it sort of reflects one of the other questions here, is that what happens when not all companies or small enterprises can afford certification, and there is a large segment of the business entities that are small and medium-sized enterprises who cannot, who are often working in the informal sector, who do not have the technical expertise or the resources to get the certification, and not only not get the certification, but also are not part of a supply chain that can benefit from it. And so that's where the role of the government, I think, comes in, is really in the non-certified group, is how do we get them to improve their environmental performance. And the other side, I guess one more side of it that I think is important to, because it also reflects on the government, is that, while we've been sort of talking about these eco-labels and how they are, of course, typically costly for the businesses that are getting them, and those costs are going to be passed on in part to consumers, and that is why there is got to be this willingness to pay for them, and that willingness to pay comes with income. So in some ways, eco-labels are a luxury good. They are for the people who have the income and the ability to buy these sort of products. But again, we're dealing with billions of people who are not able to do that. The people who are living on $1 and $2 a day, and yet should be provided safe, clean food and other products. And so again, you need the government to come in to make sure that everybody gets a certain level of environmental quality and protection, not just the ones that are able to buy or produce certified goods.
Yeah, thank you, Mary. I think that it's working, yeah. The challenge there, yes, for all the micro industries, small, medium enterprises who don't have the size which is sufficient, so maybe working through industry associations, working with the consumers associations, which are not that strong in developing countries, in middle-income countries as well, they are not that strong, and therefore, helping. So there is definitely a role for the government, especially in the years to come. I have a question for Geoffrey now. WWF has been working, as I mentioned, identify the 500 most important companies in terms of trying to hit the minimum effort, the highest type of impact, and so large players have been identified to get maximum results. But what are the we know some of the benefits and some of the positives in terms of the results which are coming. What are the challenges you've been facing? Some of the negative, some of the failures. I know that people don't like to talk about failures, but in terms of lessons learning, and after now a number of years in the various soft commodities, what are those things that you expected differently, that played out less than your expectation, and you're now trying to correct to get this multinational big corporation and behaving differently?
That's a tough question. So I think the first way that I would respond to that is to look at it sectorally. I think the approach that you've acknowledged that WWF undertook through its market transformation initiative to identify the major players in each of the sectoral markets, I think by and large has been quite successful depending upon which commodity you're looking at. And in many respects, that's the success of those programs has been as a result of the concentration of the industry. And so where you have industry that's more dispersed, I think that's where the failures have come. And if I can just draw my own experience there, I think it's for example, the seafood sector, and Madhu referred to this as well, the small and medium enterprises, where there's a lot of small players and smaller players, and it's in those areas where that model has not succeeded as well. And so in terms of what WWF has tried to do to address that, and not alone, it goes a little bit to the point that I was making in the slide presentation about supporting those smaller players to go through the process of improving their production systems and being recognised for their production systems. And that in itself can potentially offer up failures as well, because many of the companies that WWF works with that have made significant commitments to sustainability are now finding that those commitments are not as easy to achieve as that was originally anticipated, seafood again being one of these. And so I think there's going to be a bit of a gear change soon as we try and start to reflect on how do we honestly portray that, and then how do we actually go about working more closely with the smaller, more dispersed producers to bring about improvement in that area. Because oftentimes you can achieve a lot more working with a smaller producer who's operating currently in a dirty way, if you will, and lifting that performance up, than you can from lifting a good performer to a slightly higher level of performance. Your impact, your overall impact can be greater.
All right, thanks. I have a question now. Yeah, this microphone doesn't seem to be working that well. Yes, for sharing. Basically, you are presenting a service provider company, and the kind of business that you're doing is in a big, large country, middle income now going high income. So what is the PRC, the China type of market in terms of, if you can give us a little bit more of a nuance type of description in terms of the recent trends, where you see movements, the type of clients that you get most often now, in which sectors, and where you see the country going. If you can just give us a bit of an idea in China. Yes, in terms of certification.
I think it's in the perspective for certification body, we are very close to the market, and I think the most important is that we should bring value to the customer, and then with the value, the customer are willing to pay, and then the market will grow. And this already proved to be like this with the economic growth in the past years. I think everybody witnessed in China. And in terms of certification in the sustainability sector, and ISO 14000 and ISO 50001 are also the emerging standards that also with the push of the central government and even the regional government. And even in the areas, for example, I have a project of Sewage Asia project in Shanxi province, and that province in Xi'an is for any application of ISO 14001 certification is paid by the local government. So as a kind of subsidy. So it's in the regional level, there are also a lot of campaigns or subsidies, driven by the regional or central government, to push also the voluntary standard to be met, and also to encourage all the companies to go for higher standard instead of only the minimum compliance.
Very interesting. In the case of PRC and the role of government and local governments, provincial governments. So I will have now a question for June in terms of the awareness and education and the type of efforts that you have been doing in terms of all the story around the certification around forest products, in terms of awareness raising, especially at the beginning and then more recently. What type of efforts and how difficult has it been, you know? Especially because you have two types of certification and all of that.
This is quite a big question because it's like we always say within our organization, we try to do too much and reach too many audiences. So like I see this like a few areas here. One is like the certification itself, how it operates, how it works. So we try to bring down the message into like a more layman level, because like a lot of time, like I think in the panel we talk about it, we don't just want to work with big brands. We want to work with small and medium enterprises as well and smallholders. And a lot of time there's a misconception that they will think, oh, it's like a really complicated procedure, it's very expensive, I could not afford it. But I can share with you an example, like in Japan, there's a wood crafter. He basically worked on his own. His company got one person, that is him, but he is FSC certified. It's not impossible. It will need some work, but I just want to say, like, it's not like certification is not a luxury for big brands, for companies that have environmental departments. So that is one thing. And on the consumer side, we want to educate the consumers that the label actually have values, because that actually would affect how they buy or like their choices on the purchase choices. So there's one thing we work, for example, we will work with corporates that like want to promote the same message, because we ultimately want to bring connection to people, that forests and people are like all well connected. So for example, there's a lot of everyday object that we're trying to do and work with the company to let them know what's the meaning behind that label, and we want to like push forward that. So for example, like Tetra Pak works with us a lot. And you can see in some countries, for their drinks, it actually got the FSC label. But some of them actually, even if it's FSC certified material, their client, which is the beverage, the brand owner, would say, oh, it's too crowded, I don't want the FSC label to confuse with our brand, can you just take it off? So they will take it off. But even like that package is actually FSC certified product. So like we will work with companies like this to try to educate companies to their clients that there's a meaning behind the label, and by put that on, you will bring like positive association to your brand itself. Yeah, so this is like the kind of awareness raising and education that we try to do. Yeah, and we want to like sort of go further, so you'll see like there's production of those video, which is also like more layman terms to tell people like what is the meaning behind that label.
Thank you, June. Very interesting, and in many ways also anticipating the question from the floor with the highest votes, which is about small, medium enterprises, and you mentioned about a company made by one person. So the question actually, I open it for the floor, I mean for the panel anyway, if anybody can add anything on that, on how and what happens to SMEs who cannot afford certification and labeling, but who are actually close or more authentic and true to their vision of green business. In many ways, and we may have lots of cases where especially small companies actually are doing green, they are producing green, but they cannot afford certification. So what is your suggestion, or any of you, I mean, maybe a couple of you can just give a views on this question?
I think what really should could be done in that case is to have the government step in to provide the sort of technical assistance that is needed for these companies. And I think that is happening, there's a lot of anecdotal evidence, at least from China, that in fact the government is providing technical assistance, and that is why there has been, and almost in fact making it mandatory that any company that wants to trade internationally has to be ISO certified. So that would be one approach to do that. Of course, it's resource intensive, but that's one approach.
Yeah, if I could maybe answer this in a slightly different way. I think it probably depends quite heavily on what the supply chain for that business looks like. For example, is the end product, is the consumer in the end market demanding a certified product in order for them to buy? If that is, then that's certainly one case where it could be a disadvantage, or it could be penalising a small and medium enterprise. But I might just try twist that around a little bit and say, we haven't talked very much about it yet, but there's this issue of the business case. So if you have certifications regarded as very costly for a lot of industries, particularly in the seafood sector, and the argument then becomes, does it make good business sense? And listening to Fazul talk about his process through Plummy, I'm sure that was going through the minds when they were going through the processes that they went through, that it makes good business sense if it's saving money, if it's creating value for the firm or the business, and there's not necessarily a demand for that product in a certified product in a marketplace, then there's space there for the business to work within. And again, I think the government has a role to play in that, in terms of supporting those good companies that are interested in performing better by providing positive subsidies to those companies to help them on that journey.
So definitely a role to play by different stakeholders, from the consumer side, from the government side, from the industry association side, and we were actually looking at all of the business cycle, as I was mentioning at the beginning, so the inputs, the process, the market, and the output. So I think there's definitely lots of opportunities there. I would go for the second question, maybe from the Pigeonhole. Yes, the 12 votes seems to be interesting. Would obtaining certification and labels make these products more expensive and therefore not being able to reach a wider or mass market? Yeah, we've been talking about the price type of implication and impacts, commanding a premium, and of course labeling certification is something that can give a degree of confidence to the consumers in spending a little bit more. But yes, we have also heard that in some of the markets this morning, I think Matthias was the one to mention that organic food can be twice or even 3 times more expensive than a normal agrochemical kind of produced vegetable or any other food product. And the question there is, of course, economies of scale and all in terms of production, but also in terms of distribution and reaching the market, economies of scale in the transport, in the cold chain, all of that in reaching the consumer. But the question is, up to what extent the consumers are ready to pay a premium. So there, again, probably there is a role of government and a role of the various organizations who work around the market, the distributor themselves. And you know, whenever I go down to Mega Mall, I get annoyed because very often they price products per half a kilo. And this is, you know, SM. It's not just the last guy in the wet market shouting the price per half a kilo. So I mean, if big organizations like this, they still go to this kind of, you know, cheap methods to actually get the consumers to buy durian per half a kilo instead of per kilo, I mean, I wonder what consumers should do in order to, you know, to be better protected in many ways. So this question is actually something that it's an important one, you know, up to what extent? Absolutely.
I like to answer this question from my own experience, that we are already certified, not only the LEED, we have the Gold certificate, OCOTEX, many certificates we have to maintain. And the question is very relevant, whether it would be expensive. Certainly, it becomes expensive to get all this certification. But on the other hand, it also gives me some power to negotiate with my clients and accessibility to my clients as well. So it depends on ourselves that there's one part, I'm coming to the second part later. There's one part that's how I put into the whole game my pricing. Can I get it from my client? Or I just increase my power, just selling down and going to the upper market to sell to get the same price. So that is also depending on my capability of negotiation. But on the other hand, if the intermediaries, that means the producer and the customers, if there is one brand, let's say the retailers, if they play their role in a responsible way, I think that customers will not be affected at all. Just to give you an idea, we are producing the garments. Do you have any idea that's how much premium they charge on a T-shirt, for example? You don't have any idea. The big brands, the costing, their purchasing price and their selling price difference, you would not be surprised if it is even 20 times. 20 times, not 20%, 20 times. So even a non-branded T-shirt is a branded T-shirt, like say, without mentioning any name. I don't like to put any name. It's a top brand. I'm making the T-shirt for that brand, and I'm making the T-shirt for any non-brand. That costing difference only 5 to 10% to making the brand T-shirt and making a non-brand T-shirt. But that branded T-shirt being sold, 20 times higher price. So this extra price, because of this costing, let's say the LEED certification, the Gold certification, all of the things, the few cents more, the brands can easily accommodate into their pricing. But what's happened in reality, whenever they go with a certain label, okay, I got a request from a brand just a couple of weeks back. They would like to put extra label in their garment that this garment is produced from the greenest factory in the world. I told them, I need some money. Oh, why you need money? Okay, I don't need money, but you have to make sure you will sell this product at the same price, those who have no tag. Oh, then he told, no. Oh, then you should give me the percentage of the premium. So that is how the things are going on. So it is not I think, the ultimate customer who has to bear this extra cost, but it is the seller. They have enough room to accommodate this extra. Now, big question, how you can motivate them. So it is the social responsibility from their part to play this role and to sell at the same price and to pay a little extra to the manufacturers because they have enough room. That's I can tell from my own 25 years or 20 years experience.
Yeah, very interesting. Yes, June, I think this question is triggering a lot of interest.
Yeah. I also want to echo with your point as well. Like certifications and label itself probably doesn't make the product itself more expensive. It might likely be excuse of some brands to make it more expensive to the consumer. So that's like a misconception here. I just want to share a case. Like, for example, Avery Dennison is a labeling company. So like you see wine bottle, the label, like a lot of them produced by Avery Dennison. And they are actually cost neutral. They tell their clients, oh, you can use FSC certified label and it's the same price. So a lot of times, like, again, like I echo with your point, it depends with the brand.
Yes, I believe that there are different products, different processes, different type of segments and various type of services also that they have different manufacturing, different production process that they have cost implication because there is a lot of win-win. So through certification, you can go into a lot of cost savings opportunities. So in that sense, you can actually save. But on the other hand, if you are actually procuring some of the raw material, the inputs in a different way, you may have higher cost. But then in the final price calculation and all the results of that process changes and modification in the type of inputs process and manufacturing, you may have maybe only 5% increase or 10% increase, which can easily be absorbed. So it's a question of how you play with the market in the end. So we'll go for the last question maybe. Yeah, Madhu, you also have a point here?
I just wanted to add one point to this. There's two ways that certification can affect ultimately the costs and the prices. Of course, the very act of certification, the segregation that's required, this chain of custody that we're talking about, is likely to be more expensive. It's sort of almost common sense to think that it's going to be more costly if you're going to segregate this, or similarly with GM, non-GM foods and so on, as opposed to if you're not. The question is whether that cost is passed on to the consumer or whether it's going to be absorbed by the firm, and that of course depends. It's a market force, and it depends on a variety of things related to how the slope of the demand curve, how inelastic it is, and so on. But one of the things to recognize is that the reason that certification and eco-labeling works is because it differentiates products, and when you differentiate products, you actually create market power, which may not have been otherwise when you had undifferentiated products. And we know with market power, competition is reduced and prices are likely to go up rather than down. So that's one thing to keep in mind. Whether it happens for certain products or not, it's an empirical fact that needs to be studied. But that is something to watch out for. The other side of that story is that consumers are demanding goods for a variety of attributes. Eco-labeling is one part of it, but price is an important determinant of demand, and then there are many other attributes. When we go to buy cars, for example, we're not always buying the most fuel-efficient cars or the hybrid cars. We're buying the larger SUVs because we like some of the qualities of those SUVs. And so when you have these eco-labeled products on one hand, there are other producers who are also given incentives to compete on the basis of price. And so they may actually lower their quality and lower their price in order to attract consumers who care more about price. So you can actually have very different effects, and it's not necessarily the case that actually certification is going to lead to an overall improvement in the green products that are available, because you can have differentiation on other metrics as well. So one has to be cautious about what role eco-labels can play in greening businesses.
Yeah, not too much expectation out of those, yes. So anyway, we have reached actually the 4 o'clock mark, so I'm a little bit hesitant if we can go into any of those other questions unless, do we have a few more minutes, or are we starting the next session, Matthias? We have a few more minutes, yes. Maybe we can go into the last question, and a couple of you responding with the 7 votes. Asian Pacific, how can you engage governments to support voluntary certification, label provider, better consumer education? Does the fish certification also encompass the supply chain to prevent losses? Yeah, this is quite interesting, although it's got 5 votes, a little bit less than the others. The fish certifications. Yeah, is it encompassing the supply chain to prevent losses? Is it a question? Yeah. Yeah, maybe a different formulation of the question.
Well, because she spoke about chain of custody. I think this is a chain of custody question, very much. And I think that, so the label, in order, for example, using my experience with fisheries, the label doesn't go on the tin and on the can of food unless the chain of custody can be verified. That product needs to be traceable from the point that it was caught or it was unloaded on the dock to the point where it reaches the final seller before it goes to the consumer. And if it doesn't comply with that, then it doesn't get the label on the can. But I think it's important to remember that a lot of product goes to market without labels but with promises, and that's where this issue can give into play. And I'll give you one quick example. Tuna in the parties to the Nauru Agreement in the Pacific, has two types of product. One is caught free, what they call free school, so the fish are swimming freely and they're caught. The other is what they call FAD caught, fish aggregating device caught. So it's a fish aggregating device sits in the ocean, and the boats go to the device. It's a cost exercise. They go straight to the fish aggregating device where there's more fish in a smaller space, and they get the fish for a lower cost. That fishery has to be able to distinguish. Same boats catch free school and FAD caught. Those boats have to be able to distinguish between those two different sources in order to get the MSC label. So that costs more, but they've weighed it up and said that the market value of that is worth it. And recently, a buyer in Australia decided to go 100% MSC and is purchasing all their fish from that fishery.
Very, very, very interesting type of consideration here. I think this question was very, very relevant for low, middle-income countries where there's so much losses in the chain. So it's definitely for all kind of food. So I will just thank all the speakers and invite for a round of applause. It was a very interesting discussion. Thank you very much.